Very much. To kick this afternoon off, we've got a fairly short and hopefully a lively conversation, really kind of, if you will, integrating thoughts across the spectrum of speakers that we heard from this morning with some additions. We've got two new participants, Ray Furstenau, who I introduced earlier, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Nuclear Energy in the Department of Energy, and then Fiona Rayment. I'm going to have to, sorry, Fiona, I have to look you up here. I want to make sure I get the title right because it's a bit different than. She's the Executive Director of NIRO, which is a division of the UK National Nuclear Laboratory, charged with strategic nuclear advice to Her Majesty's government. So I think strategy, if you will. So thank you for being here as well. I'll ask the rest of the panel quickly, if you will, just kind of, Tim, if you wouldn't mind reminding folks of who you are and your association, and we just quickly move down the table.
Sure. Tim Hanley, Senior Vice President, Nuclear Projects for Exelon.
KunMo Chung from Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology.
I'm Jacob DeWitte, Oklo.
So I'm Fiona Rayment still. From the Nuclear Innovation and Research Office, which is a division of NNL.
Thank you, Fiona. I'm Eric Loewen. I'm here as the past president of the American Nuclear Society, but I do have a day job with GE Hitachi Nuclear Energy, which is home-based in Wilmington, North Carolina.
And as Paul mentioned, I'm Ray Furstenau. I'm the Associate Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Nuclear Energy.
Very good, very good. We compared notes over the last few days, and I have just one question to pose to the panel, and as I said, this is intended to be a fairly lively conversation, and so I'm actually going to direct the question initially to Fiona, since she hasn't had a chance to speak this morning, and we'll just work our way from there forward, if you don't mind. And it really is, in the spirit of today's celebration, the question is, how do we invoke the bold spirit and the accelerated pace of the Chicago Pile 1 Enrico's Fermi experiment at the University of Chicago to meet the growing demand for clean energy while addressing the challenges facing the nuclear energy industry today? So, Fiona, please.
Thank you. Having listened to a number of the great presentations this morning, it really became clear to me that there were a number of ingredients in play all these years ago. And you really need to think about what these ingredients were. And I think there was 4 key elements that came out of it for me. One of them was that there was an absolute goal or vision or purpose, if you will, that everybody was actually working to. The second was that there was an absolute clear time frame. There was an urgency associated with what was needing to be done. The third one was that there was actually a program commitment that actually enabled the attraction of the best scientists and engineers. So basically bringing that talent to the forefront. And the final one was actually having a policy in place that actually government and industry together actually saw and understood and could adhere to. Now, if you kind of like sweep that forward now, there's a number of these elements still in play. Maybe different reasons. We have a goal. Whether it be associated with security of supply, whether it be enabling enough energy, whether it's because of poverty, whether it's because of security of supply, whether it's because we need to increase the amount of electricity from a transportation point of view, there is a goal there. Some of it could be climate change. I know it's quite the key thing at the moment in the US, but personally, I think that is absolutely a goal that we have to look at. We definitely have a time frame in terms of what we have to adhere to. We're very lucky, basically both in the UK and in the US, around the fantastic scientists and engineers that we have created over time and are still around, and therefore we need to utilize these people with all that experience and expertise to best effect to bring in the new community going forward, next generation nuclear from a people point of view. So we have all that. We just need policy.
Policy.
And so from my point of view, if we can get the right policy in place that actually drives all this forward, that brings industry and government together and national labs to get to the right endpoint, I think we've got it made.
Very good. Let me ask Ray to comment next, please.
Okay, similar to what Fiona said, I think we, in this setting, we shouldn't underestimate the importance and of the national labs and working and taking advantage of that, of our national lab system here in the U.S. for that innovation, and to work closely with industry to really revive and expand nuclear. I know, Jake, we've worked with your company quite a bit on that as well, and I think seeing the value of the industry and the national labs working together, the government being more in a listening mode to see what's needed by industry to help with that revitalization. And something that Paul, you said this morning, I think is just as important in the U.S. system is where are the appropriate investments that people and facilities, and of course having the adequate funding to do that. And so I think from a DOE or government standpoint, our challenge is how does the government best help with risk? Because that's, I think, what our role is finding our right niche in helping with the risks of endeavor, like a commercial deployment of nuclear, and that can be in the technical areas, in policy, in financial, and in regulatory. So I think as we move forward in the short term, we need to address all of those things, because we need to do something different. The reactor designs that we're looking at now, they're kind of twists on old designs that were really invented in the 60s and 70s, and even in the 50s. But we definitely have to do something different if we're going to see those really mature and get into commercial deployment in the future.
Very good, very good. Dr. Chung, we were all impressed with the great progress, the great program that the Republic of Korea has established. How about your thoughts on this question? Oh, sure. I'll repeat the question. Sure. How do we invoke this bold spirit and the accelerated pace of CP-1, Chicago Pile 1, to meet the growing demand for clean energy while addressing the challenges facing nuclear energy industry today?
For a long time, I have been advocating that nuclear energy and renewables are not competing. They are complementary. So I remember that our discussion at MIT, when I was at MIT, we had one professor who was very wise, Dave Rose. Do you remember? Dave was a fusion specialist, but also energy policy specialist. He passed away, but he said, yes, we believe in renewables if there are people who can purchase renewables, please encourage them. But nuclear energy is for long-term base loading, so that we have to really encourage nuclear industry so that people with less endowed can enjoy electric supply. Now, media people like to have debate instead of a complementary discussion. So right now in Korea, we do have ongoing discussion. But as I told during my presentation, this is a great opportunity of public education. So we hope that our general public are more informed, and instead of following the final answer, they know what are conditions behind, what are those background of discussion, so that not only short-term choices, but long-term choices should be taken with the public's support. This is how we approach now. I think the Paris agreement should be also deeply discussed in this country. And it's not just a choice of something over the other. So, this is what I've been advocating.
Okay.
More attention from the public. That's what we have to entertain.
Okay, good. Tim, please, from the Excellence perspective.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we have a vested interest in keeping the current nuclear fleet running. So I think anything that can be done that makes those more viable and focused attention on things that I mentioned, like accident-tolerant fuel, other uses for off-peak electricity, or off-peak energy from a nuclear plant, from a technological standpoint, I think is key. But from a public policy standpoint, I don't think we've even come close in the United States to recognizing that nuclear and renewables should be complementary. And the public policies that have been enacted over the past several decades to increase renewables, reduce greenhouse gases, have actually, in some cases, had the opposite effect. Until people recognize that and the unintended consequences of those things, and recognize that if you lose the nuclear power plants, all the gains that you've gotten from the past 20 years of production tax credit, investment tax credits, will all be wiped out very quickly, and you're starting at a net deficit now. I just don't think that's clear to the public or to the policymakers that has to be addressed, and making it a national interest to keep the nuclear plants, a national policy issue to keep the current nuclear plants running while we're developing the next generation of nuclear plants is key, or we will be left behind as China and the other countries that are moving forward, Korea, will really dominate that area and leave us kind of holding the bag with whatever comes out of that. So.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Jake, please, we'll work our way back down the table.
Yeah, I think one of the things that sticks out to me in looking at the picture on the screen is the people factor on this. And I think that was one of the key enablers with what happened in the Manhattan Project and the story that went there. I don't think you could argue that was one of the few, if maybe only ever, time that such a confluence of brilliant minds came together to solve such challenging problems. We have that same human potential today in nuclear, and to do what we need to do, but we have to think about it differently. This isn't going to be I think we've seen this, it would be nice to see big policy commitments, but I don't see a large Manhattan Project style commitment or Apollo project coming forward to push the nuclear side forward, and I don't think we need it. I really don't. I think there's enough of a piece at play in terms of why people are going into this field. There's enough potential based on just the absolute cost capabilities that nuclear has, that we're seeing innovation be stimulated that way. I didn't start a company because I thought I could get a check from the government to pursue this. I started a company to stay away from the government, but not entirely. But we work very closely, of course, with the different entities in the government to pursue these things, and the paradigm is changing, like Ray alluded to, and with the success of the GAIN program, we see a new model of what a public-private partnership really looks like, where we see that there's an attentive audience listening to what we as an industry are trying to pursue forward, what we need to do, but with not only an eye on now, but an eye on the future in terms of the significant investments at basic level R&D that the labs are just the world leaders on. And something that kind of strikes me similarly is when you mentioned, Ray, the idea of where the government can fit in terms of risk appetite, and how do they do de-risking. There's another very important ingredient to that is their technical capabilities and skills. the things that happen at Argonne, the things that happen at Idaho, at Oak Ridge, at the various labs across this country are unparalleled anywhere else. And they open up fundamentally new ideas in materials and in fuels and in modeling and simulation space that really drive forward what we're doing. All of that's coming to bear now. Those are fruits that took a really long time to harvest in some people's eyes. I don't really think it was a long time. It's just a natural progression of innovation. It's never been cheaper ever to design a new nuclear reactor concept, thanks to advances in materials and modeling and simulation invested in over the past few decades. There's a huge de-risking factor right there that's already paying fruit. That's what's stimulating so much of this innovation right now, because you don't have to go raise $20 million just to build a critical pile to test something. Instead, you can spend $500, buy a great cluster or a little desktop machine from eBay and throw on a open source simulation software piece or some of the different tools being developed and get a pretty good answer and go from there. Those are important pieces, I think, to keep in mind in those different ways in which we're all starting to work for this goal, which is the nebulous thing that's hard to describe, where it would be nice to see a real commitment lining up why we care about nuclear at the policy levels to provide that certainty and security, but at the same time, the grassroots drive of that is starting to become pretty self-evident in terms of the people going into nuclear and pushing this forward. They care about climate, they care about energy resiliency, they care about it because it's cool. We can't lose sight of that. This is some of the coolest science in the world, in the universe. And so those are the pieces that I think are very important to unlock and fully encourage and help blossom. And different programs are coming out that are doing that. And I think one of the big pieces that's left that there can be a big fix to is the markets. Because Tim wouldn't really be interested in buying my reactor right now because they got to figure out the market considerations. If the market was really thriving and healthy and I can deliver at the cost, he'd probably take that meeting. Those are the things that are also holding back. We need to fix that demand side. There's not a challenge or shortage of good ideas. We just need to make sure we fix the right pieces and have the right partnerships in place that we can really help those flourish.
No, very good, very helpful. Eric, please.
So if we take Fiona's 4 ingredients, I would distill them down to 2 words. One is simplification and the other is focus. So on one end of the spectrum, Tim has talked about simplification in our nuclear promise, and I think we, as any organization, we tend to make more and more rules, and do that simplification helps do that. Then if we look at focus, I've seen what the Department of Energy has done with their technical review panels, with GAIN, and trying to really harness where we need to go. So simplification, focus.
Oh, very good, very good. Appreciate the great thoughts, actually. Let me turn it back to Dr. Chung here in terms of kind of the theme we ended on, I think, in terms of simplification and focus probably was most prevalent in your presentation. Can you speak about how you actually brought that strong focus in a simplified standardization approach to the nuclear industry in Korea?
Well, as you see that we set up long-term planning, like a 20-year planning.
Sounds like the mic's not on.
But also linkage policies. So in 1970s, we carried out very comprehensive policy research. It's not simple policies, but how to have educational policy, how to have financing policy, all those. So as I said, the direct, indirect, and the linking policies. So we carried out step by step that And in doing so, we involved the national lab and private sectors and also educational institutions. So it's not, my answer to your question is not just a simple this. It's a comprehensive package policies. That's what we pushed. And when I was in the government, I had to deal with the politicians. So instead of telling them, black and white, I always gave the other side. And then you choose. So make our policy their policies. And then we implement it. And so it worked perfectly. It's not, we scientists or engineers are always right, and you are not well educated, that type of thing. So also when certain things done, we always gave politicians the credit. You did it. And I remember a few times when I talked to former president, you did it, and I don't remember. But I have this signed copy I showed. He was so happy, and he told other politicians, yes, this is the right thing I did. So I think whether you simplify the process or whether you carry out, I think we have to understand the mechanisms of human beings and the mechanisms of the society. And instead of taking certain credit, you see actors and let them be your friends. Then we saw the result. We didn't do it perfectly, but we tried. And so far, it gave us the foundation of our entire endeavor.
Very good, very good. Let me ask Fiona to comment again, if you wouldn't mind, in terms of what you've heard and the thought of simplification.
It's really interesting. I'll comment on it from a sort of UK perspective.
No, you're okay.
You're doing well. I'll shout.
Fiona, this one works.
Thank you. No, I won't do anything. I'll just be very careful. Yes, so within the UK, I think that what we've done in terms of complicating things has been very much around putting nuclear capability into everything that relates to nuclear build, for example. And so what I mean by that is that we seem to have nuclear engineers and scientists doing everything, not just the nuclear engineering and science aspects. And where you then get to is things get quite complicated. Mm-hmm. So one of the discussions we've been having recently is actually around how do you get the right group together to project manage a new build program and do it in a way that it actually comes in on time and on budget. Well, you probably do it from the point of view of bringing in people who are very good at project managing infrastructure projects. But it might be a rail project. It might be an aerospace project. It doesn't need to be a nuclear project. You still need the nuclear engineers and scientists to do the nuclear island component. But there's a whole variety of other aspects that you don't need it for. And so I think that's where we've got to. So we've overcomplicated things by not bringing the right team together in a lot of cases. And I think you can automatically simplify things very easily by bringing a broader team together that have the right skills and experience for what's required.
Very good, very good. Let me ask Ray if he'd like to comment as well.
Yeah, I would agree with Fiona. You know, the simplifying things when Mr. Chung, you talked about the Korean experience in the UAE and those I don't know, just doing some rough math, it looked like the construction goals that you challenged, Jake, in your presentation, the 2,500, the UAE projects are probably pretty close to being at that. And so I think there's, and maybe that's oversimplification, but those challenges can be met. I think that's the point, is we can do this if we focus on, minimizing schedules or simplifying schedules and cost to construct. Then there's an economic motivator then as well that I think will help the nuclear industry succeed.
Very good, very good. Let me ask Jake, if you don't mind, Jake, how to really play off this thought of the need for a long-term plan and keeping it simple and staying focused. From your perspective as an entrepreneur, how do you accomplish all those objectives?
As at our company, I think you have to be maniacally product-focused and not process-obsessed. And I think that's an important piece to always maintain. And I can tell you it is challenging. We're implementing our nuclear quality assurance programs and all of those right now and the procedures. It can be challenging, but if you stay focused on product, you see the pathway that you get there with. And I think that's a really important thing that can apply to any organization. Now, we have an easy job defining the product. It's not always so easy, especially at national labs or especially at the government. We understand that. But I think that's a really valuable piece to keep in mind for all organizations, is how do you keep that really strong drive, almost a culture of maniacal obsession, honestly, with shipping a product that's usable, that people want. And that ends up, I think, keeping people focused on the things that really matter. And it helps simplify, it helps drive simplification in the process to get there. And I think that's one of the key things that I think as I look at the cultural transformations, changing the way business has been done as usual in nuclear, there's a lot to reap there alone. And I think we're starting to see those dividends, and we'll only continue to see that over the next hopefully many decades, as we develop a really strong, thriving nuclear energy ecosystem.
Yeah, very good, very good. I'll end the conversation there. Just a quick summary, if I can, in terms of the items that were mentioned. The question was, how do we invoke the bold spirit and accelerated pace of CP-1 to meet the growing demand for clean energy while addressing the challenges facing the nuclear industry today? And good conversation. I think certainly Fiona reminded us the key elements of CP-1, really, which there was a goal established. Certainly a vision had been laid out in terms of what needed to be done. Time frame was defined. There was a real program commitment to actually deliver on this, and then attract the best talent as part of that effort. And certainly that was part of one of the primary focus in terms of how Enrico Fermi delivered on his commitment for that first controlled nuclear chain reaction. And then you also talked about the need for policy. We went on from there and talked a bit about risk and how we could address risk basically through policy to some extent, and also in terms of really driving innovation and thinking about new technologies and de-risking the technology in that way. I appreciate the kind comments about the National Laboratory throughout the conversation. Anytime we get to say good things about the labs, I love it. So thank you all for that. I think we also talked about really the need for a longer-term planning as well, and really yet being willing to be innovative and entrepreneurial within that longer-term plan, and really maintaining the focus on the product in terms of the end state of where you would like to go. So simplification and focus in quick summary. So thank you all. Thank you. I think we should give our panel a round of applause, please.